Ladies and gentlemen, Elizabeth May.
Thank you, Neil. And I really want to also particularly start this evening by thanking Taylor George Hollis and Eddie for giving us such a beautiful welcome to traditional territory, Coast Salish people, and all the villages you named, which I apologize that I'm not remembering all the villages you named. I really am very, this week has been a week I've spent a lot of time on First Nations issues because I was with the BC Elders gathering. They gathered on the traditional territory with Saanich people within my riding, and the very next day I was in Montreal to speak to the Assembly of First Nations, which is a huge honor. And the call for the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, very much with me. And whenever I hear that drum beat, and I think, you know, when we start a Green Party gathering with the acknowledgement of the traditional lands that we are on, and we're honored to have people from those First Nations welcome us and give us a welcome song. Do you know how fortunate we are? How much we are honored by that welcome. And every time I hear the drums and I think, you know, that's a heartbeat. That's a heartbeat happening. And it's really only from our heart that we're going to ever find that path to healing and reconciliation. So I'm very grateful to you, as I was to be greeted at the gathering of Assembly of First Nations in Montreal. And then knowing that this is, I think, something of a theme that we're going to have to carry forward, not just in the election campaign, but when we get to Ottawa after the election, the work we have to do. On Vancouver Island, you may not know all our candidates, but we have 7 ridings on Vancouver Island. 5 women candidates, 2 men. No, I have nothing against the men. They're wonderful candidates. But I'm so honored that 2 of our candidates on Vancouver Island are strong First Nations women leaders. Cowichan Malahat Langford. Fran Hunt-Janucci in Cowichan Malahat Langford, who is a former chief of her First Nation, and Brenda Sayers running in North Island Powell River, who was the leader of all of us, really, who stepped up. Her chief and council from Hubakasset First Nation, just outside Port Alberni. You may remember, because you probably are on the same mailing list as the rest of us, you probably got the messages from the Green Party, you probably got the messages from Lead Now, donate to this court case, because only one group is standing up against Stephen Harper and the Canada-China Investment Treaty. That was the Hubakasset First Nation. And they put a lot on the line. And the Green Party, by the way, is the only party that actually converted our fundraising efforts into helping that court case. And Brenda, in the course of all this, has become a Green Party candidate at North Island Powell River. Wow. We are really, as a party, wanting to be, not in a competitive way, we'd love it if all the parties had the same policies we have. That would be great, right? The other parties are constantly seeking what they call the wedge issue. How you divide everybody and grab an issue where nobody will agree with you, and then you're really happy, because you've achieved the opposite of consensus. Our political party process thrives on hyper-partisanship and the idea, in fact the goal, that you want your party to be the only party that campaigns for something, right? I mean, in Stephen Harper's case, the only party that will campaign against the niqab, as if it matters what a woman wears to a citizenship ceremony. But you know, he's staked out that ground. He's got that ground. We're a party that wants other people to come on board while we achieve political consensus. So in this case, I hope as we go forward in the election campaign to have a lot of ideas that we put forward out of our platform that other parties will say, well, that's just such a good idea. We'd like to do that too. We see signs of that. The NDP have adopted some of our policies on C-51, for example. Yes. And I really welcomed the fact that the NDP decided to oppose C51. I was grateful. I'm not competitive, but I'm slightly less grateful when they claimed they were first. Because since I went way out of my way to say to them, if you decide to come out against C51, we won't make a big deal about the fact that we were first. We won't, you know, point out to people that it took you so long, because the main thing is that we're together and we fight this, right? I still think that's the main thing, so I'm grateful that Tom Mulcair decided to come out against C51. And at first, when he came out against it, he was not in favor of repealing it. At first, his position was indistinguishable from Justin Trudeau's position, which was, we'll fix it later. But C51 is not fixable. No. C51 must be repealed. It is incomprehensible that a democracy would adopt a law which allows for a secret hearing of which the Canadian public will never know, with no presence of anybody in the interests of civil liberties or the well-being of Canada. And this is the thing that we developed in Canada after 9/11. The first set of anti-terrorism laws included, if you're going to grab someone and throw them in jail and not tell them the charges against them, not necessarily give them access to an attorney, to a lawyer, basically violate habeas corpus. If you plan to do that, which we do with security certificates, you have to have someone called a special advocate in the room. Even though it's all secret, you have a special advocate who says, well, wait a minute, do we really need to trample on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms quite that much? Could we maybe modify this? That's why we have special advocates in security certificate hearings. C51 creates a private hearing with no appeal before one judge in secret, where the only party present is the Minister of Public Safety, to ask for a warrant to allow constitutional breach. It's stunning. No democracy anywhere on the planet has anything like what we find in C51, which is why it has to be repealed. There are many other sections. I could speak for the next 2 hours on C51, but I don't think that's what we're here for. So I'm very, very gratified that the repeal position that Greens took first is now echoed by the NDP. I'd be even more pleased if the Liberals would repudiate the horrific decision they made, which still makes no sense to me, since most Liberal members of Parliament knew that C51 was appalling legislation, but voted for it because they were told to. And with the, basically transparently, the explanation was, well, this way we can sidestep that moment in some future debate where Stephen Harper says, you Liberals, you didn't help us fight terrorism, you voted against C51. So they almost congratulate themselves at how clever it was to vote for an appalling bill to avoid that one moment where Stephen Harper might say, you Liberals failed to fight terrorism with me. The important thing to recognize too is that when you study C51 and look at the evidence that was presented by security experts, C51 actually makes us less able to protect ourselves from terrorism. So there are a lot of examples where Greens don't want to be the only party claiming the high ground. And on no issue is it as important to get other parties to adopt our position as it is on the climate crisis. We must educate all of the other parties so that when the election is over, and we do think the election is going to be on the fixed election date. I mean, Stephen Harper could still move that. But the fixed election date is October 19th, which last count was 98 days from now. And, people begin to panic about the number of days. Just yesterday, I went back and thought, all right, I was elected on May 2nd, 2011. And 100 days before that was January 22nd. And I went back and looked through the news coverage on January 22nd, and for any media mention anywhere that the Greens were likely to win any seats at all. Don't worry about what people say 100 days before an election. They've never ever thought Greens were going to win a seat. After I won my seat in Saanich Gulf Islands, the media seamlessly moved from Greens will never elect anyone anywhere to Well, they may be happy that the leader has won a seat in Sandwich Gulf Islands, but don't worry, we'll never hear from her again. And I have to say, it was someone I respect enormously in the Canadian media who said that. It was on the CBC Saturday morning program, The House, the first time they convened after the election in 2011, and it was Katie O'Malley, who's a brilliant political commentator. And since then, she's been really nice about it. She said, I know I said that. I didn't know one MP could do anything. And it's true. How would you know when the only MPs you've seen have been in other parties? Where they're controlled and told what they can do and what they can't do.
Exactly.
And when you use parliamentary democracy and respect Westminster parliamentary democracy and the fundamental principle that all members of Parliament are equal, this is a scandalous piece of information for Stephen Harper, but under our system of government, the Prime Minister is merely first among equals. And I've got to double check this, but I think historically this is correct. It's certainly the majority of Prime Ministers, but I think it's actually all of them. All Canadian Prime Ministers, I think, right up to Pierre Trudeau, did not regard being Prime Minister as a full-time job. You can look, most of them, if not all of them, were also Minister of Justice as well as Prime Minister, or Minister of External Affairs as well as Prime Minister. This new title that Stephen Harper has adopted for Prime Minister, you know, all Lord High Dictator, omnipotent, boss and bully of all. That's the full title that you find in... see it because of the security that surrounds Langevin Block, but if you actually get access to the Prime Minister's office, I believe that what I just said is in brass across the door. Well, that's not actually the job of a Canadian Prime Minister. And we're going into this election campaign once again with the media, with all their misapprehensions and assumptions, that we're about to enter a horse race. That's what it is. And it's all about the boys. There's 3 of them, you see, and one of them is going to win. Every time someone says to me, do you think Tom Mulcair will win? I said, I'm absolutely certain he will. He's only running for his seat in Outremont. I can't see him losing his seat in Outremont. Do you think Justin Trudeau's going to carry Patrick? Yeah, pretty sure. I don't think Stephen Harper faces any real challenge in Calgary Southwest. Our system of government is about electing 338, this time with 30 new ridings, 338 members of Parliament. And under our Constitution, it would be completely legal if when we showed up as a group, we looked at each other and said, I don't know, who do you think should be Prime Minister? You know, of all of us as MPs, who works well with others? Who will be able to forge consensus and focus on the common good to advance what Canadians need most in terms of stimulating our economy and creating jobs and ensuring that we have a healthcare system that isn't having the wheels fall off of it? We have a lot of critical issues, and we need some people who put working together ahead of the current political dynamic in Parliament, which is how do we decap the other guy today? I watch this in horror. I love being a parliamentarian. It's brilliant. I love working for my constituents. I probably work a little too hard, but as soon as we get Claire elected, now I have to mention the other people we have to get elected who are in this room, because this election is going to change everything. Not just for the Green Party, but for Canadian democracy. Because we actually are the only party that's willing to say out loud that our system of government involves the supremacy of Parliament. That the Prime Minister reports to Parliament, not the other way around. I'm afraid the other leaders will be very happy to take the levers of power that have been illegitimately amassed on the Prime Minister's desk and continue to use them to suppress voices they don't want to hear, to instruct their MPs what they can say, when they can stand up, when they should sit down, and certainly when they should shut up. I'm afraid that whether it be the NDP or the Liberals, that the fundamental systematic changes that must be achieved to have real democracy flourish in Canada again will be hard for parties to accept when they believe that, well, the excesses of power by Stephen Harper were an outrage. But my excesses of power will be great because I've got good ideas, right? Canadian democracy requires a group of members of Parliament coming to the rescue who understand that you never put your party ahead of Parliament. You never put the self-interest of your partisan gains ahead of the well-being of Canada. And coming to the climate issue, you never sell out the opportunities for our children and grandchildren to have a future to score a few more seats because it's opportunistic in the moment. That while I was being a pain in the ass to Claire, and I was thinking when she said that, conjure this, the moment when a Conservative Party candidate steps up and explains that Stephen Harper's been a real pain in the ass. Contemplate how quickly they retire. In any case, I begged Claire Martin to run because she's credible, she's a scientist, she has integrity, and everybody loves her. But it wasn't until I explained what we could do together after the election. You see, we're going to be in a minority parliament. Every indication is that none of the big three are going to have enough seats to form a majority. Praise God. That will create the opportunity for a group of Green MPs. We don't know if it requires a big group or a small group. The Australian Greens were able, in the election before last, to determine whether it was Labour under Julia Gillard or the right wing under Tony Abbott that would form government. In that one election before last, the balance of power in the Australian Parliament was 1 seat. So you never know how close it might be. I frankly think we should have a whole lot more than 1 MP to be sure that we can do what needs to be done, which is to say to the other parties, you need to work together. We will work with you. And frankly, Stephen Harper would never, ever, ever have become Prime Minister if not for the insane degree of partisanship that allowed the NDP and the Liberals in 2006 to stand back and allow Stephen Harper with a minority of the seats in Parliament to form government, instead of stepping up and saying to the Governor-General, excuse me, we here represent more Canadians and our policies are more closely aligned one to the other than allowing Stephen Harper, whom we firmly believe will never move on climate action. You know, they didn't take a vote in Parliament. I don't even think they had a vote in their cabinet before announcing that Canada no longer felt obligated by our legally binding obligations under the Kyoto Protocol. Stephen Harper announced a new target for Canada within weeks of taking over 24 Sussex Drive with no vote in Parliament, no public discussion. That's how much power a Prime Minister can wield in our system of government, because we don't have checks and balances, because we're a Westminster parliamentary democracy where the Parliament is supposed to be in charge. It's very dangerous to forget your system of government. Canada is a sort of, we're kind of in early onset amnesia here, or something's happening. We think we're in the United States and we're electing a president, but our Constitution wasn't developed to elect a president. Therefore, we have no checks and balances on the abuse and excesses of power of a Prime Minister. It's very dangerous if we don't remember our system of government. But in this minority parliament that will happen after the next election, we want to work across party lines. Regardless of where the party seat counts are after the next election, we would never stand back and say a minority parliament is possible with Stephen Harper as Prime Minister. That is not possible. We would lie down in the roads to block that as firmly and as surely as Lynn Quarmby will block a pipeline. This is what I told Claire, and I begged her why she should be the next Member of Parliament for North Vancouver. With her knowledge of the UN system, and her knowledge of climate science, and knowing what Canadians want from their government, we would go to any of the parties that are close to being able to form government with our help and say, you guys are busy right now, you know, forming a cabinet and doing other things. Let us do the background work to ensure not only that Canada has a strong position going into the climate negotiations. I think probably being Green supporters, you all know that the negotiations that begin November 30th, 40 days after our election, are the deadline for a new climate treaty for the world. And Canada is not ready. None of the other parties are ready. And we need to be that green glue that holds everything together, that goes to Paris, that ends up with the headlines that say, Canada's back, Canada was in the lead, a really significant, globally meaningful treaty was agreed to because Canada was back. Yeah. I did allude to Lynn Quarmby in the room. Lynn, will you stand up, the candidate for Burnaby North Seymour? And of course, Lynn is a leading scientist in her own right and chair of cellular biology at Simon Fraser University, and not likely to become a candidate for public office until, well, I kind of had to talk to her too, Claire. And I also had a word with the man at the back of the room, former mayor of Whistler, Ken Malamud, running West Vancouver Centre. You can see the lovely geography of hope, with apologies to Chris Turner, who coined that term for his book. But the geography of political hope charts a course from Burnaby, North Seymour, and Clare, or rather Burnaby, North Seymour, and Lynn, through to North Vancouver and Clare, through the West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country, and Ken, where we can form a green wall to protect our coastline. Regan, who's running in East Vancouver and has not only the talent with his guitar and his voice, but is a brilliant social entrepreneur working on green businesses and the opportunities of urban agriculture and clean tech and small business co-ops throughout his riding. So Wes, you've got a great shot in East Vancouver. So I could basically talk to you guys for hours about how excited I am about this next election. For one thing, it's a long time coming. Although some people think, Rex Murphy apparently said on CBC, not that I've ever agreed with anything Rex Murphy has said on CBC, that I hate Stephen Harper, and that is absolutely untrue. I have absolutely no ill will towards him personally at all. I've actually forged a pretty good working relationship with him within Parliament. I go talk to him and he nods nicely and you know, we have a respectful relationship in which he has never accepted any of my amendments. I did get 2 amendments through the Pipeline Safety Act, by the way. Yeah. Safety Act, if you want to know, isn't actually about pipeline safety. It's about who pays for disastrous accidents caused by breakages in the pipeline. But I did get in 2 changes. One which said that instead of the minister may seek compensation from the company that has the accident for the cost of the accident, to the minister shall. And I also got the legislation, and this all got passed to say not only can provinces and municipalities seek compensation from said polluting company. So can First Nations that experience any costs or damages due to this. Speaking, Stephen Harper and I have a perfectly respectful, decent level of communication, probably better than he has with the other leaders. It's not that I dislike him. As a matter of fact, it comes from a profound place of affection and concern that I want him to be immediately retired. So much happier, as will we all, as he rides off into the sunset, grabbing somebody's all-terrain vehicle and yelling over his shoulder, "I make the rules." And Parliament after this next election must change. We need to disassemble the illegitimate powers amassed by the Prime Minister's office, brick by brick if required. We need to reassert Westminster parliamentary democracy. And in this context, I want to tell you that Right Honourable Joe Clark spoke in my riding in January at a Green Party event. Can you imagine? It was a non-partisan event, we assured him of that, but still, he did tell everybody there that I was, well, he was very kind about my role in Parliament. But what he also said was that currently, Stephen Harper, and this is a quote, Stephen Harper is violating Magna Carta. Yes. 700 years worth of parliamentary tradition. Now that's a fairly strong statement of the challenge of rebuilding parliamentary democracy, restoring all the laws that we need that Stephen Harper has repealed. Policy area after policy area after policy area, like an act of serial vandalism. Stephen Harper has removed our ability to collect statistics, and he's suppressed the science. He's dismantled our criminal justice system, as well as our immigration and refugee system, as well as our environmental laws. It's an appalling trail of wreckage. And at the same time, and I mentioned earlier Brenda Sayers and Hupakasset First Nation and all of our efforts to fight the Canada-China Investment Treaty, that is the single most damaging thing Stephen Harper has done, because he has locked us in till the year 2045 to an agreement that erodes Canada's sovereignty and gives the People's Republic of China superior rights to Canadian companies or to Canadians. So I need to be in those leaders' debates to make sure that Justin Trudeau and Tom Mulcair understand that if the People's Republic of China files a secret complaint with Canada, the Canadian government must make it public so Canadians know about it. And we will never cave. We will not settle out of bogus. I mean, you can't call this thing court because it's a private arbitration process. We will never settle. And I don't know how you guys feel about this, but the price of our sovereignty, the price of our navigable waters, the price of our wild salmon is beyond calculation. So if we have to, thanks to Stephen Harper's efforts to destroy our sovereignty, if we have to write a check to the People's Republic of China to regain our own laws, so be it. We write a check, and every time we write that check, we say, "Thank you, Stephen Harper." But we write the check, we bring back our own laws. So, I think that they're going to get out the hook very soon for me, because I've probably talked longer than the time they wanted me to chat with you this evening. I just want to thank you so much for being here. This is the most important election in Canada's history. I've only skimmed the surface of the questions before us and the things that matter. But this is the election about whether we can regain democracy in Canada. This is a fight for who we are. This is the election where we reclaim our soul. This is the election where Canadians stand up riding after riding after riding and say, we are engaged in the political process because our lives depend upon it. Vote Claire. The choice is Claire. She's your next member of Parliament. Nothing you've ever done will matter as much. Thank you.